How do you make money from a podcast? It's the question I get asked the most at the moment. More recently, it's become even more specific, with people asking me how I'm going to make money out of my podcast. But the answer is, I didn't start my podcast to make money. And if making money is the main reason you're thinking about starting a podcast, I'd probably question whether it's worth it for you. Don't get me wrong, there are ways podcasts can generate revenue, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But the reason I launched the Feeling Content podcast had nothing to do with direct monetization. There were three main reasons. The first reason was to help reposition my role within LOFT ONE12. As the business grows, I want to spend more time in leadership and strategy and create space for the team to take on more of the production and social side of things. The podcast gives me a platform to share ideas, talk to interesting people, and step further into that strategic role. The second reason is something people don't talk about enough. A podcast is an incredible way to learn from people who are further ahead in the journey than you are. There are loads of areas in business, content and marketing that I'm still figuring out. So instead of trying to work everything out on my own, the podcast allows me to sit down with people who've already experienced those challenges and learn from them. And by doing that, those insights also get shared with the audience. The third reason is content. Creating content consistently is one of the biggest challenges for founders and marketers. It's rarely a lack of ideas, it's usually a lack of time and structure. A podcast helps solve that. One long conversation becomes a cornerstone piece of content that can be turned into reels, shorts, posts, blogs, and clips that can be shared over time. Instead of constantly chasing the next post, you start building a content system. And this is where the real value of a podcast often shows up. Not necessarily in direct revenue, but in things like building trust with your audience, showcasing your expertise, strengthening your personal brand, and creating conversations and relationships with people you might not normally get access to. Over time, those things can have a huge impact on your business. Now, of course, there are ways podcasts can generate revenue: sponsors, ad placements, product placements, with the classic example being a well-placed brand sitting on the table during recording. But before any of that becomes realistic, you have to build something first. You have to be consistent, you have to build an audience, and you have to create a podcast people actually want to come back to. And that takes time. Later this week, I'm going to break this down a bit further. I'll be sharing how just the first episode of Feeling Content podcast has already been turned into multiple pieces of content across different platforms. It's a simple example of how a podcast can become the starting point for a much bigger content strategy. So if you're a founder, creative, or marketer thinking about starting a podcast, keep an eye out for that. Because the real value of a podcast isn't just the episode itself, it's everything that comes from it.